Hello, and welcome. And this is the Volume 5 of RWBY Quality Analysis. And we finally get to it after all these weeks. And I've actually rewatched the show, so I have a pretty good idea of everything that's happened. Volume 5 is essentially the end of the Mistral arc within the overall saga. We had the Beacon arc, which is, volumes 1 and 2, or you could also call that the Monty arc, because that was where Monty's hand still felt present. Then volume 3 never happened, because it just didn't, obviously. And then we have volume 4 and 5, which are the Mistral arc, effectively, and it pretty much concludes at this point. We do have a good sense that next volume they're probably going to head over to Atlas. Atlas is going to become more relevant, although I could also see the party splitting up and leaving certain characters like the rest of Team Juniper back in Mistral. Something tells me that might happen, although I don't know. It's not obvious what exactly they're going to do. However, even so, the Mistral arc feels generally concluded. They solved the problem there, and there's a clear indication that the problem will now be elsewhere. I want to say that Volume 5 was good, but my issue is, first of all, I'm not comparing this to the first 3 volumes at all, because everything past Volume 3 is very different, and I said as much back in my Volume 4 analysis, is that the Monty arc is its own thing. In fact, this is even more relevant now. You can look back at volumes 1, 2, and 3, even 3, and you look at that, and honestly, volume 1 and 2 at this point feels like it's essentially RWBY Chibi with action scenes. That's how volume 1 and 2 comes across at this point in history, especially with everything we've seen, and especially with the sort of tonality that the story is going for at this point. A lot of the events that happened can't be canonical. They literally can't be canonical within the context of the world that we're in. They don't fit. They don't fit thematically. They don't fit rationally. Most of the main characters don't make sense if you consider the world that they're in now compared to the world that they were in back in Volume 1. They should have known better even back then. Ren and Nora were orphans back then. Okay, but they come into Beacon, as dewy-eyed children that have never seen a terrible thing in their lives. And then you have Ozpin training these kids, and it's presented and treated as this fun little game. Yeah, you're using your own landing strategy, but you think about it now, and if Jean wasn't saved by Pyrrha's spear, he would have literally died there. Yeah. And if students literally die at his academy, that means his academy is not this prestigious, hey, Yang, let's get on a ship and go to Beacon. Hoo-hoo, fun times ahead. No, it's actually a brutal place where brutal things happen to kids, and these kids would have to grow up much, much faster than they actually did. They would not be stuck in this bubble of innocence for so long. Moreover, most of the events would just be treated with much more like gravitas. There'd be much higher stakes, whereas back then there was no sense of stakes. I've already ranted about this back with when Volume 3 happened, the whole tonal shift, and even Volume 4. But it's even more relevant and even more palpable now. The Monty arc just cannot canonically fit with the Mistral arc. The events, similar events might have happened, but tonally, the way those events were presented could not have been presented in that way. They could not have happened that way. They could not have been set up fighting Nevermores and Scorpions on their first day of class. That's not how that works in this world. In this world, that literally kills students. Okay? So yeah. It's you gotta watch the Monty arc with those, decanonicity goggles on and make sure, it's roughly, some of the stuff that you're seeing is roughly canon, but it's generally not canon. It's about as canon as RWBY Chibi, as I say. I claim that to be the case anyway. regardless of what anybody at Rooster Teeth actually claims, it's effectively as canon as RWBY Chibi. And that brings me to an interesting point, because if you look at this volume, consider how much more gravitas there is in every single scene. Every time anything happens, there's always somebody crying or miserable or, you know, dying, and you actually see corpses for the first time. You actually see bodies in this volume pretty brutally. The noise that Sienna Khan makes when Adam stabs her, it's terrifying, and it's like it lasts way too long as well. It's like it's there to make you feel like, oh damn, this is actually serious. And it's in the presentation, is my point. You know, those kinds of events, that kind of death, would have been happening back in Volume 1 and 2, because you still have Torchwick and Grimm invading the city and people dying. That kind of stuff would still happen back then, right? It just wasn't shown that way. You had no sense that the universe was this, that this sort of visceral. You had no sense of that, but you do have it now. Spoiler alert, you see a corpse. I might just spoiler alert for the whole thing going forward. Vernal's corpse, right, is, you actually see her, that's like the first dead body, like straight up, wide eyes, dead body, and then Raven does the thing where she closes her eyes. There's so many people crying this episode. Jean cries, Yang cries, Ruby, Blake cries, everybody's crying. Ilya cries. And Raven cries. There's no one who's not crying this volume. It's a volume of crybabies. Now, I'm not criticizing the crying. I'm just saying the general tone that sets is very again, and that kind of goes back to what I'm saying about the Monty arc, is that there would have been crying in the Monty arc as well. With all the brutal shit that was going down in that city, there would have been crying. Nobody was crying though. Nobody really cared. It was all like, hee hee, let's take down Torchwick. Yeah, it's fun, guys, right? That's my point about the, non-canonness of the Beacon arc, the Monty arc. So, let's get into Volume 5. Again, I generally want to say there's a lot of good ideas with Volume 5, and if anything, the drawback to all of it is that it is... The flaw with a lot of this stuff is just not presented well. There's flaws in the presentation. A lot of the writing feels very clunky and amateur and endemic of a general problem, which I've sort of begun identifying as the Rooster Teeth bubble. And I'll talk a bit more about that later with specific examples. But if anything, the flaws are that. On top of that, there's a general sense of something missing. There were definitely storytelling opportunities that were not taken this volume, and instead they decided to focus on things that either weren't that interesting or didn't really make that much sense. And that's also a consequence of the Rooster Teeth bubble, and I'll get to that with specific examples. Well, actually, I guess I could come to the first example right here, which is that the politics of Haven. Now, see, they mention the politics of Haven a lot. They mention the borders closing with Atlas. They mention the council. Leo talks about the council over and over again. But we see very little of it. And the thing is, there's another bubble, which is the story itself only wants to focus on the students and the huntsmen and huntresses that are sort of there. But it doesn't want to focus on the non-combatants. We don't really get the politician's perspective. We don't get the average citizen's perspective. We don't even get the bandit's perspective. We hardly get anyone's perspective. Volume 4 gave us more perspective, because Volume 4, we actually saw a lot of the common folk. We saw how they lived and the villages, and we saw them with Weiss's interactions with her family. Those were all people who weren't combatants. And this is why I'm going to constantly refer to the fact that Volume 4 was much better than Volume 5. Volume 4, as a storytelling piece, it managed to weave set building and character development and you know, expanding the setting and adding to the setting and adding to the narrative and adding to the world, it managed to weave that in with the characters and what they were going through. This volume did none of that. You had the characters, and they were in their own little world, doing things that, you know, continuing the plot that was set up back in Volume 4, but the world might as well have not existed. In fact, if you remove, like, the first scenes in Episode 1, where they see the actual city, you probably wouldn't even be able to tell that they're in a city. Unless, I mean, without listening to the dialogue. If you just look at the images, there's no sense that they're in a city. You know, they spend the time in a house, and you have Crow walking around some other houses, but there's no expansive sense that they're in the city of Mistral. Okay, that you see the mountains. Their budget just didn't go into that. That might have been a budget issue, if anything else, but it's a shame because you really, you know, the way they presented it at the end of Volume 4, you got this crazy city. It's like, I want to see more of this city. Where is the city? You know, where are the mountains and the houses and the people? The only thing we get is some, you know, 2D sprites of people just standing still as everybody else looks over the city, but then we don't see the city for the whole volume. Instead, we see a bunch of, you know, well, we see the main cast stuck in their bubble, and that's pretty much it. I mean, the only time we really see the city is when Crow walks out and starts asking questions about the lost huntsmen and huntresses. And that's actually a point I want to mention. I like the fact that that is in the story, because that is like the one little bit of setting building that's actually there, and they took care to leave that in throughout, and it actually comes back as a plot point at the end when Crow confronts Leo about it, and he says, because when he realizes they're not gone because they all died by accident, they're gone because he's literally sending them to their deaths, setting them up. And if you think about that and how long Leo's been doing that, that is pretty sick. And that is why Crow gets as upset as he is. So that is the one, you know, that is the one bit of, you know, world building this volume that I actually really like. But there needed to be more of it. You know, we needed to see more of the city and more of the politics of Haven and the, you know, the police and all that. We didn't really get any of it. Even like all the politics in Menagerie, we didn't really get anyone's reaction to what Blake and her family were trying to do there with the whole announcement. We didn't get to see how the effect of that. It had no effect. Nobody saw it, you know, and they couldn't beam any of the information because the CCT was down, but nobody, it didn't matter. It was just setting up what they would later try to do in recruiting people. All right, so the story starts, and we get our little plot set up right at the beginning, and it's like, essentially, Raven has a maiden, and you know, and we're going to try and get her in a few weeks. Except, you know, and that's the thing is, that is as simple as the plot is, because everything that happens after that is Leo comes to them and tells them, we're going to get together now and go get the maiden. So they didn't have much of a plot. I mean, the plot was, we're going to get the maiden. Oh, let's go get the maiden. Oh, here she is. Like, there was no steps to that. When I heard about this maiden plot, I was like, oh, okay, maybe in the middle of the season they're going to try to actually go and get this maiden. But that didn't happen. It was very drawn out. A lot of people, even people who are real fans of the show, complained about the pacing. They thought that there was a lot of nothing happening, and I'll get into like what I think the greater reason as to why, because there was a lot of screen time. This was a very long volume. It was multiple hours. This is the closest that RWBY's ever felt to like a legitimate TV show, but the pacing was just off. If you think about the A plot of them trying to get the maiden, they showed up in Mistral in episode 1, and they sat around for 10 episodes until they had that fight starting in episode 11. That's the plot. That was the A plot, right? The B plot was Blake's plot, which was okay, but even that felt drawn out for a few reasons that I'll get to later. So Weiss has a cool plot. Weiss has a cool little scene where she fights some bees, and then she gets captured by Raven. All right, That's fine. I actually didn't mind Weiss this volume. She didn't have too much growth or development, but her general like perspective on things and the way she acts seems very sensible to me and very just very in character. And I did really feel like she had, you know, grown from who she'd been before. The impacts of Volume 4 were felt. The only issue is you hear about her talk about her family and how she knew, you know, how the problems of her family and her mom and dad, but she doesn't carry any of that baggage when she shows up in Volume 1, which is, again, the decanonicity thing I'm talking about rearing its head. So, you know, Monty Arc non-canon is still a thing. But overall, she was fine. Weiss was fine. Blake was fine as well. The only issue with Blake's plot was it was too drawn out, and part of the reason it was too drawn out, I think, is really just a mistake that they set it up in a way where they needed to get recruits to try to stop Adam. The problem with that is that they shouldn't need recruits to stop Adam. Like, they could just get on a boat, go over to Mistral, show the authorities the intel, and the authorities know the White Fang is a serious, violent organization at this point. They know, you know, they know that the White Fang was complicit in the fall of Beacon. At least we think that they know. In any case, they have that intel. They know that the White Fang are not like a human-friendly organization. They have the ability to stop it, right? Now, one of the counter-arguments I hear from the Rooster Teeth bubble is that, well, it's better to have random people with you there. No, that it's not that simple, because those people are civilians who don't have fighting training. You're asking them to uproot their lives and travel across the ocean to stop a terrorist attack in another country. That kind of thing just practically doesn't make any sense when, really, you don't need a large group of people to stop Adam and his cronies, because there's not many of them there. Or at least, maybe they didn't know how many of them would have been there, but still. Mistral is a massive kingdom. They have police. They have an army. They could easily deal with this themselves if they knew it was happening. This would have been different if they had somebody in Mistral who tried to get the attention of Mistral's police force, and they didn't listen. Then you needed to go recruit civilians. But they would need to be on scene to know that. They wouldn't have been able to know that back in Menagerie. This really doesn't make sense logistically, from any logic perspective. Regardless of what you may think in the bubble, this just doesn't make sense. Why they would need to recruit anyone to get this done. The fact is, they needed to recruit people in order for the Menagerie plot to have more significance, and the whole point was to show that, hey, we're standing by the humans, you know, because we're faunus and we're being nice and we're standing. That was the idea, again, but there's the problem is there should be other ways of showing that other than doing something like this, which just practically makes no sense. And it goes back to what I say about how the story feels like it's in a bubble. You know, it's like the politics, it's like Mistral doesn't even exist. Their politics and their police, they have no impact on what's happening. The presence of the city is not felt. So much so that we need to fly people in from Menagerie, which is half a world away. If the story would not have been happening in a bubble, would have been them adding relevance to the fact that there are actually people in Mistral who can help us. We don't need to recruit random fucking civilians in Menagerie. It's just not a practical thing to do. As soon as you get that intel, you get on the first boat to Mistral and you go solve the problem. That's how you deal with that kind of thing. But they had to draw out Blake's plot. Now, other than that little aspect of setting it up, the Blake plot was fine. It was generally, I mean, they had a whole lot of fights that were fairly drawn out, but as far as what was happening, it made sense, except for the fact that it felt like elongated for no reason. You have Sun and Blake trying to recruit people who don't want to be recruited, and you just have this long sequence where they're talking and recruiting people, and it's like, okay, I get the idea. Nobody wants to go on your stupid journey. The thing about, like, I get a little annoyed at that, because that whole sequence is an example of that amateur clunky writing that I'm talking about. Right? What they wanted to show was that nobody wants to help you. What they ended up showing was a sequence of people just cartoonishly shaking their heads, and then Blake talking about people by describing them in one word. RWBY is innocence, and Yang is strength, and Weiss is defiance, even though those two things aren't mutually exclusive. But hey, Adam is spite, and it just felt so amateur. Like this was written by... It felt like fan fiction writing, if I may be so bold. The way they could have presented all that information, rather than doing that, is have a scene where Blake and Sun together are trying to convince a bunch of people. Like, they're sitting around a table and trying to talk to some people, and those people are giving them counter-arguments. Like, hey, I don't necessarily want to go because of this. Rather than Blake explaining to Sun why those people don't want to go. Like, she's talking for those people. No, have the people have the people of Menagerie themselves say that to Blake and Sun. Okay? Have them say it. So then it actually has significance. Because then it's actually part of the world. But that would have required hiring a few voice actors, I guess, which they probably could have done. I mean, it's a few small little lines here and there. They probably could have done that. It wouldn't have cost them that much. And then, you know, had some nicer dialogue, and rather than having this boring sequence where Blake gives us information we already know, just have them talk to the NPCs in not the NPCs, the random people in Menagerie, and have the people of Menagerie explain why this isn't a good idea on their part. But there's another reason why they're not going to do that, because if they did do that, that would reveal the nonsense of what Blake and Sun are actually trying to do, which is recruit civilians to do a mission half a continent away, something that could just as easily be done with the two of them going there and telling the Mistral police, hey guys, there's going to be a terrorist attack at the Haven Academy, we have the intel, this is serious, do something about this. Okay? And they could have... What would have been interesting is if the Blake plot involved them trying to convince Ilya to somehow add credence to their to their warning of the police, because maybe the police didn't believe them. Maybe they went to Mistral, the police there did not believe them, and so then they had to somehow convince Ilya to join their cause, to give to sort of validate everything that they were saying so that the police would take that threat seriously. That is what the plot should have been about. Okay? And that would have integrated all of the main pieces, right? What it was actually about was, well, shit that didn't make any sense. And yeah, that whole scene where Blake and Sun are talking about and Adam is spite, that scene is so badly written. The way my version of it, I think, would be much better. So let's go to Ilya. Now, again, I say this like there's good ideas here, because Ilya's story itself I pretty much like. I have no problems with her, and I have no problem with her turning. The voice actress for Ilya did a very good job. That scream that she makes when she's angry is that shrill. It's something. It's a perfect sort of blend of confusion and anger. She doesn't know what to do. She's angry and she's frustrated and she's just acting because, you know, she doesn't know how to make sense of all of it. And that's where a lot of that violence comes from, as well as resentment of Blake and for her falling for Adam and all that. Yeah, honestly, the whole romance thing between Ilya and Blake, I didn't feel that was totally necessary to tell the story. I mean, it didn't need to be there, but it didn't really take much away from it. It's the difference between Ilya being like in love with Blake and acting crazy as a result of that, versus Ilya just, you know, acting crazy because Blake is her friend. I mean, either one of those still works. The other good thing about Ilya's story is that it takes a lot of steps to actually get her to switch sides, to get her to stop, fighting against the Belladonnas and actually join them. It takes, it takes a whole bunch, first of all, Blake has to fight her, and then Blake has to pin her down, and then Sun has to fight her, and then she's about to die with the wood that's collapsing, and it's not until Gira saves her life by holding up that big chunk of wood or whatever that I think she finally turns. Before that, she's still angry and confused. And part of her lashing out against Blake is to get the confusion to go away. If Blake shuts up, then her mind can settle down and with what's she thinks is good for the Faunus at this point. It's a little cliche, I suppose, but the general the general heart of that kind of story is definitely there, and I like that. And then you got Corsic and Fennec, who are, I didn't actually think that these guys were fighters. First time I saw them, it's weird because everyone in the story needs to be a fighter for some reason. But, alright, they're fighters. The only thing about them something about their presentation I actually liked is their attitude towards Adam, is that they don't have a completely, they see Adam ranting about Blake and how insane he is, and they're not, on board with it. They're sort of he seems unwell. Are we sure that this guy should lead us? It's and the voice actors pull this off as well. It's because Corsic and Fennec, when they're talking, they have this general they have this general attitude of they know what's happening, and they're they have this creepy fucking intense awareness to them. But when they have Adam ranting, the one guy looks at the other and he's like, "Are we sure this guy should lead the White Fang?" It's the first time that they ever feel uncertain. And then the other one's like, "Perhaps for now." I like that. I liked that whole. I like that little bit because, of course, you wouldn't want Adam to lead your organization, even in in any realistic sense, not for too long, because the guy's fucking insane. You don't want that kind of person leading you might want them in times of stress. You don't want them in times of peace. That's not the kind of environment that people like Adam do well in. All right. So then we have, I'm just looking through my notes. Yeah, so I mean that's pretty much Blake's story. I don't have much more to say about it other than some of the concept and the setup didn't really make sense, but the parts of the delivery with regards to Ilya and her sort of becoming good, that was generally well done, and I can give them props. I can praise the effort that was put in there and what the voice actors did. Now, let's get back to the bubble. The bubble here referring to the story bubble of Team Ranger and basically the party, the students. Team Ranger has no agency this volume. They just sort of sit around. They show up at the beginning with the intent of finding the maiden, and then they just sort of sit around for 10 episodes. They don't have a lot to do. They train, they play games, they talk. That's pretty much it. They don't do much. Things are done to them. They don't drive anything forward whatsoever. It's actually kind of pathetic at how the story tries to give them agency by having RWBY sort of interject in conversations she has no place in, "You're wrong. We can do better. We're good." and fucking Oscar talking about her isn't she magnificent? It's yeah, I mean, really? Just because she's not, completely negative right now, that makes her magnificent? I don't see that. Like, I'm sorry, but she has to do a little bit more than just be, casually optimistic in one scene. It's just around the fact, like, she has to do something, not just say, we can't be sad, we have to keep fighting. There's got to be more than just that. Oscar and even Oscar and Crow don't have that much agency, but at least they, at least with them, there's a sense that they're aware of what's going on. Team Ranger just doesn't do anything, and they're just they're essentially show up in Mistral, and then they just wait for other people to show up and tell them what to do. And it's annoying because they spent all of Volume 4 on their own trying to get to Mistral. That was their goal. But here they don't have a goal, right? This is what part of what's disappointing about the volume is that a lot of our characters are just basically grounded until the plot comes to them. Then there's a really annoying thing, which lots and lots of people have been complaining about, and I'm certainly going to complain about it, and to hell with anyone who tries to defend this. The students, Team Ranger, should be asking way more questions than they ask. They should be far more curious with Ozpin than they are. A lot more curious. It is actually astounding that they take so many things at face value and they don't ask. The thing is, it's not even about taking things at face value. There are consequences to, like, the statements that Ozpin gives that they just don't bother asking about. Like, for example, Ozpin mentions he's been reincarnated. How many times has he been reincarnated? How old is he? What kind of magical gifts does he give? What kind of other magical gifts can he give besides turning people into birds? Okay, what do the relics do? Why are the relics so important? Why are they hidden in these vaults? What is the point of all this? And the thing is, the defense I've heard against this is the most asinine thing I've ever heard, which is, well, they're just kids. Why would you expect them to be smart? Are you serious? Are you fucking actually serious with that? I'm sorry. This is an example of people being caught in the Rooster Teeth bubble. Okay? You're looking at this as if it's happening inside, like the Rooster Teeth writers, they have a plan, and it's all going to be delivered to you, and whatever's happening in the story it just makes sense because it's, it's a fantasy world, and that's how kids are like. They're just idiots. Okay? There's a difference. Okay, there's a difference between somebody not being curious and somebody being a genius. I'm not saying they have to be geniuses and figure things out, but they should have questions, right? They live in this world, right? Within the context of this world, they have certain impressions and ideas of how the world works. When Ozpin comes along and tells them he's been reincarnated in this kid, that should shatter. That should absolutely destroy their understanding of the world that they think that they have. But they just accept that, and then they don't ask any questions. How is that a trait that young people have? Young people aren't curious? Are you serious? I want to fucking bitch slap anybody who throws that excuse in my face as like, well, they're just kids. Why do you expect them to be geniuses? That is so stupid. I'm sorry. That is just stupid. That is the poison of the Rooster Teeth bubble corroding your brain, my friend. No, the real reason is they should have questions. There's a lot of questions. We have questions because we have our own ideas of how the world works, but the kids have their ideas of how the world works. They should be asking questions about all this magic that's happening that they, have never seen before. To them, do you understand that this is like they're discovering electricity for the first time? That's what this is the equivalent of. The fact that people can turn into birds, that is what that is equivalent of to them. They don't know that shit like that can even happen. It's the discovery of a new principle of physics, okay? And it's very relevant to the scenario that they're in. Yes, they would have questions. And the most annoying thing about this is RWBY actually does have questions. She asks, well, what happened to the relic at Beacon? But she doesn't ask anything else. Oh, okay, she asks if the cane is a relic. Okay, but she doesn't ask anything else. There's literally like a dozen other questions you could ask. Do you want to know the real reason nobody asks those questions? I'll tell you the real reason. Because there is no way that they could answer those questions without giving spoilers. Or rather, Miles and Carrie couldn't figure out a way to answer those questions without giving spoilers. And that just pisses me off. I absolutely hate in fiction when there is information, relevant information right there in the scene that the character should be interested in, but it's glossed over because plot, because we cannot give that information away, because the writers do not want to give that information away at this moment. And this volume is rife with that kind of neglect. Oh, boy. It's so insulting, too. There's an interesting point here about magic. RWBY has an interesting thing where it's like there's the magic in the setting that's normal, and then there's the magic in the setting that's abnormal. There's the, there's the auras and semblances, and then there's this other layer of magic on top of that, the maiden powers, the crows, the Weiss's family fucking, ability to have these, like, white, like, spirits that she summons. There's this extra layer of magic, and the relics, of course. This extra layer of magic that's in the world. Now, there are other stories that have also done a similar thing, and the example off the top of my head is the novel series, the Kingkiller Chronicles by, I forget the guy's name, Patrick Rothfuss, I think. It's a series of books, and the first book is The Name of the Wind, and in The Name of the Wind you have... There's this world, it's a fantasy world, and they have essentially two types of magic. They have sympathy and naming. And sympathy magic is essentially like it has its own rules, and it's like transferring energy kind of like in thermodynamics between different systems. You have like he sucks the cold out of one thing to like cool down some other thing. Only it's not done, the way we do it here in real life. It's done with magic, but it follows those kinds of rules. So it's like the sympathy, and sympathy is down to a science. To the people in the world, they view sympathy the way we view thermodynamics. It's very well understood. Then there's this other form of magic called naming, which is far more elusive, I guess. People don't really understand naming in the world of Name of the Wind. That's actually where the phrase "Name of the Wind" comes from. It's the name of, like, it's kind of like, I'd explain, it's like when you name something, you have like ultimate control over it. So if you know the name of the wind, you can control the wind and just like move the wind, like airbend, like it's like magic, right? So that's how naming works. And naming is a lot more complicated than sympathy. Very few people understand naming, and the people who do understand naming and can actually name things and like are insane to a certain point. People don't understand how they think. They're very they're very eccentric genius type characters, but they're also like almost completely bonkers, the people who actually understand naming. The point is, though, the common people of that world don't understand naming. And to them, naming isn't relevant because sympathy is relevant. And to us, it's like the equivalent of, quantum mechanics and stuff. That stuff's not relevant to us. Although, if it is relevant in some situation, and we look at it, and we look at how the actual process works, it feels like fucking magic, because it's so far from, your understanding of how reality seems to work. When you get down and look at it. That's kind of how the magic in RWBY should work. But the problem is, RWBY doesn't have anywhere near that depth. The magic of Ozpin and what he can do is not regarded or treated with anywhere near the level of, I guess, like, amazement and astonishment that it should have. The way Ranger reacts to it, it's like, oh, you've been reincarnated, okay. And, I mean, they're surprised, but then it's just over. Then they accept it and move on. It's so banal. Like, they should have so many more questions with everything that they've been through and everything they understand about the world. Again, this is an example of the story happening in a bubble where the writers aren't thinking about the greater context in which things are happening and what the characters know about the world itself. They're just looking at it as, how do we get from point A to point B? They're not looking at the big picture. And that's why nobody's asking those questions. Or they're intentionally neglecting the big picture because, spoilers are in the big picture. Yeah, so that's just, that kind of thing is like, it's suspension of disbelief cracking, I guess. Okay, so that's what I have to say about magic. And then we have Yang. Oh boy. I really did not like Yang's story this volume. Her story was amazing last volume. But this volume, it was as if Yang learned absolutely nothing from what happened last volume. And the most annoying thing, is all presented as if she had somehow grown as a character. But in terms of everything she did, she didn't actually grow at all. She did nothing but make mistakes, right? You have the bandits in Raven's camp, and the bandits are pretty much useless, and we don't really learn anything about them, which is another thing I might get to later. Well, actually, no, I'll talk about this now. The bandits were another example of world building that needed to happen, just like the world of Mistral needed to happen, that we didn't get. We didn't really learn anything about the bandits. We didn't get any sense of their culture or any kind of explanation or demonstration of why they do the things they do or how long they've been at it and so on and so forth. Why Raven even has that mask. And for fuck's sake, I swear to God, if people are going to mention some stupid-ass interview at RTX that explains all this, fuck you. It should be in the story, okay? They need to, you need to understand, they need to use the screen time to add something to that world, right? You can't just say that there's stuff that's added to the world, but we don't know about it. No. It needs to be added in the scene. Okay, they did this in Volume 4. I know they know how to do this because they did this in Volume 4. Every single arc with all the 4 main girls added things to the scene. They added, but they told us nothing about these bandits or anything about like how or why or even their culture. We didn't see any of it because very little interact with them. The only thing that happened, what happened was this, okay? One person shows up, gets captured by bandits, and they're assholes. Another person shows up, fights some bandits, has a conversation with Raven, leaves. And then some other people show up, fight some bandits, have a conversation with Raven, and leaves. We learned nothing about the bandits themselves through this process. Again, they had no agency whatsoever. Nobody interacted with them in any relevant, demonstrable way. Again, it's like that conversation Blake has with Sun. Rather than just showing us more of the world by having Blake and Sun interact with the people in Menagerie themselves and have them tell Blake why they don't want to go to Mistral, we didn't have... The same thing could have been done with the bandits. We could have had people literally talking with the bandits, I guess. We could have... I mean, there could have been extra scenes with Vernal talking to the bandits, or Weiss, or whatever. Or just like showing, demonstrating how the bandits think. Or when Yang and Weiss talk to Raven, Raven could have given them information about her tribe and what they do and why exactly she's making the choices that she makes. She could have told them things about her tribe, which she didn't do. She could have been giving her reasons for acting the way she does and how her tribe works. That would have been part of world building. But that didn't happen. And just like the Menagerie thing, the Menagerie scene that I've imagined didn't happen. So it's just a huge missed opportunity with these bandits. And the bandits are so useless, too. Like, they can't fight anyone, and I find that so stupid, considering that these people are out in the wild somewhere defending themselves against Grimm. It's like, they should be a lot better at fighting than they are. Hell, Vernal is pretty damn good at fighting. Where are the other bandits that are good at fighting? They don't seem to be around whatsoever. There should be a bunch of them that are that good, right? I mean, how else are they surviving out there? This is a dangerous fucking world. Like, if you're not in the safety of a kingdom, you will be torn to shreds. But that doesn't happen to them. There needed to be so much more with these bandits. Like, why Raven cares about them so much, and why she's taken such steps to try to... Like her and Crow, like, the place they went from, their culture, the essence of their childhood, you know, how they grew up, the things that they learned, the things they believed, why that led to them becoming the people that they did. None of that is there. There's no context whatsoever to anything like that. You know, Crow and Raven, they're just who they are because they have some personal differences. You know, she's scared and she's selfish, and Crow wants to help out. That's it. It's as superficial as it's been thus far. You know, there is no building on anything we didn't already know way back in Volume 4. Even before Volume 4, but especially in Volume 4, Crow and Raven have that conversation. Nothing more, no new information is gained since then. Except for this idea that Ozpin turned them into crows and Raven. Turned them into birds. Which, by the way, why is that such a problem? He turned you into birds. Okay, he gave you a superpower. What an asshole, right? Why does Yang look at Ozpin with like... why would you do that to them? Why would you do that, Oz? Why would you give them superpowers? You're such an ass. You're such a bad person. What? What? Why would he give them superpowers? In a world where you gotta fight monsters to survive that might kill you? It helps you travel around and stuff? What an asshole, right? Jesus fucking Christ. What should be happening is she should be astonished. Like, the question should be, like, how the fuck can you do that, Oz? What the fuck? You can turn people into birds? What? How does that even work? And it's like, and then Crow even says right after that, it's like, yeah, I mean, we asked for that power as well. Like, and I'm just like, yeah, I mean, why is that a bad thing? All that tells us is that Ozpin has some crazy fucking ability, but that's what you should be concerned about. Why is she acting like it's some fucking monstrous thing that he did? It's so stupid. It's so fucking stupid. I swear to God. Like, this makes sense in Carrie and Miles' heads, but nobody but the plants in the Rooster Teeth bubble know what the fuck is going on in there. Okay? This makes no sense if you separate yourself from the bubble for a second and just look at this as a work. Christ. So then we have Yang's story. I'm trying to get to this before... Oh, God. Yang. Yang is absolutely ridiculous this volume. She walks in... She's doing things that don't make sense. Like, she acts in a way that she shouldn't be acting in, considering what she knows about the world now. She's basically acting the way she did back in Volume 1. Like, she walked in that nightclub without any fear, any concern in the world, acting like she owned the place. And if Junior didn't give her that intel, she'd kick his ass. And that's what happened. She does the exact same thing with this bandit camp. And the problem with that is that doesn't make a lick of sense, because she's in actual danger there, or at least she should be. But she walks in there acting like she owns the place. Now, I want to fucking stress, Yang has no relationship with her mom. Okay? It's not like she knows her mom well. She doesn't know her mom at all. She hasn't seen her mom in a very, very long time. In fact, there was a whole thing with how she couldn't even find her mom before. How does she know where her mom is now? How she so easily finds her mom at the start of this volume. And then she just walks in there and starts, like, dictating to Raven, "Take me to Crow, damn it!" Excuse me? Who the fuck are you talking to? You don't know this woman. You haven't seen her in years. You have no relationship. You might be upset at her and resenting her for leaving you, but you're in no position to start making demands, acting like you own the place, like she owes you something. She's not somebody you're in a comfortable social relationship with. I'm saying this because it literally doesn't make sense that Yang would even think that she could do that. Right? It's not even in her character. Even if it is in her character to be a hothead, it is not in her character to be a hothead in a scenario, in a social situation where she has absolutely no experience and no leverage. This isn't somebody she knows well, that she has an established rapport with of any kind, or any established tension. She doesn't know the woman at all. For all she knows, Raven might kill her. She acts like she knows Raven well walking into that fucking camp. That's what bothers me. That doesn't make any sense. All she knows is stories. She's barely met her mom in her, adult formative years. She doesn't know the woman anywhere near enough to start making those kinds of demands. And then she talks about how she didn't want a fight. And I just had to go, ugh. She didn't want a fight. So what happened was she was at the gas station and the guy was about to grab her hair. She stopped him and then she punched him and then beat the shit out of him. Well, she didn't beat the shit, but she beat the shit out of him. She didn't have to do that. Then he takes her over to some glade and then he comes back with some people. And then she proceeds to beat the shit out of them for no reason. She didn't have to fight them. She could have just told them, hey, I'm Raven's mom. I'm here to see Raven. And what should have been happening is she should have walked in there with no confidence, very shy, sheepishly. Even Yang, who has been a hothead so much, would have been fucking a little frightened walking into that situation. And granted, they do talk about how she's scared because her hand's constantly shaking, and that's a thing that's there throughout the whole volume. But she doesn't act scared at all. She doesn't act appropriately at all. She shouldn't. There's a fucking bunch of reasons why this doesn't make any sense. Number one, she shouldn't have been able to beat them in a fight, because these bandits should not be pushovers, as I've mentioned before. Secondly, she shouldn't think that she could get away with something like that. She doesn't even know if Raven is still alive. Okay, maybe she knows Raven is still alive. Right, Raven rescued her or whatever in Volume 2. But she doesn't know that Raven is even there. And these people might not believe her either. She should be very, very diplomatic. Even Yang has to understand you're going into a situation with murderers, trained killers, people who are hostile and violent and are probably better at combat than you, or at least they should be. You're stepping into their world without any information, without any backup, without any fucking knowledge at all, and you're gonna walk in there and act like you own the place? Excuse me? Even fucking Yang is not that fucking arrogant and conceited. I can understand Cinder walking in there like she owns the place, because Cinder and her company are first of all, she's a maiden. Second of all, they probably know more about these bandits than Yang does. Third of all, they have Salem at their backs. They know they come there as messengers, and they didn't even come there to fight. I can understand Cinder being arrogant, because they know Raven's not going to want to fight them. Yang does not know that. Yang doesn't know, and Raven's not even the only variable here. There's other people in that camp that could easily try to kick your ass, and they should be able to. That whole scene makes so little sense, but you know why it happens? Because we needed a cool fight scene with Yang. Yang hasn't had a cool fight scene in over a volume, so hell, let's give her a cool fight scene. Fuck. Every character needs a fight scene, because this is anime. This was so obnoxious. And then they walk in there. And then she shoots at Raven. When does she shoot at Raven? I have this in my notes. Oh, no, that's later. That's later. She shoots at Raven when they're in the, when they gather in the hall of Haven Academy. When she sees the bird, she just shoots at it. Why? Why are you shooting at that bird? Are you trying to kill your mom right now? What the fuck are you doing? What is the point of that? Are you trying to scare her out of hiding? it's so... What? Why do you think she's there to be hostile? Why are you trying to scare her out of hiding? Like, why do you... What, do you think she's there to fucking kill you? Again, remember, Yang doesn't know that her mom is there to try and backstab them. She doesn't know anything. Why do you assume that she's there to be violent? That is so absurd as well. And then fucking Weiss, and sorry, I'm jumping back and forth here, but I'm taking notes on this shit because it pissed me off so much. When Weiss and Yang go into Raven's tent, after, you know, they rudely start beating people up, destroying tents, and Raven's like, alright, I'll lead you into my tent. Because, Jesus fucking Christ, I felt, like, honestly, finding it hard not to sympathize with Raven the entire time that all this is happening. She didn't ask for any of this shit. They're just doing their thing. And then people are walking in there like they own the place, telling her what to do. Take me to Dad. Did you take me to Crow? Jesus Christ. So she takes them into the tent, and then she starts info dumping things we already know. I remember people were pissed off about that, because we already knew that. And then the whole, like, hey, we turned into birds. I seriously hope that there is more to the story of why people are upset with Ozpin than what we're getting there. Because, Jesus Christ, there's not enough reason from Raven or anyone to be this upset with Ozpin, considering who they're up against. Considering that Ozpin is still fighting Salem, and Salem is definitely the greater evil. For them to be this distrustful of Ozpin. This is why so many people are predicting that Ozpin isn't actually that good of a guy. And I really hope that that's true, because that would actually justify a lot of the decisions these characters are making. But it's probably not going to happen because the show is superficial as hell. Anyway, going back to that tenth scene, Weiss says... Raven starts giving them information, and Weiss says, "You're really obnoxious." And I am sorry. I liked Weiss this volume for the most part, but that is the one time I just wanted to backhand that bitch. Jesus Christ. You're really obnoxious. Who the fuck do you think you are? You are in somebody else's tent. They are stronger than you. They are more powerful than you. You are in no position to have leverage. She could kill you both if she wanted to, and she's not your friend. And in fact, she's going out of her way to help you and give you information. You should be terrified at worst, and at best, you should just be sitting there hoping that this doesn't get bad. Not instigating things by calling somebody obnoxious. And this happens again. When Cinder's group comes to Raven, they're just the same. They're like, ha ha ha, you look at you, Raven, you're a fucking weak bitch, and I'm Cinder, I'm a badass. And then Raven's like, oh yeah, well, I'm actually more of a bad. And they just talk smack the whole time, and it's just so fucking, it's such a typical anime trope where every character just tries to out-badass the other by talking about how cool they are. Like, oh, look at what a badass I am. It's like, shut the fuck up and do something. Or do something that makes sense in context. Jesus Christ. I'm so upset, like, upon rewatching this volume about how Weiss acted there. Nobody respects Raven. Like, people talk about how cool Raven is, but nobody seems to respect her when they talk to her. They all talk to her like she's a fucking nothing. Like she's a whelp. Like she's some fucking pathetic, like, oh, you're really obnoxious. Yeah, I'm Weiss. Yeah. And then Yang starts destroying furniture. You know, not that she wasn't diplomatic already. She starts destroying furniture when Raven starts insulting her dad. Again, you don't have a relationship with this woman. Like, you might be upset that she's insulting your dad, but you're not in a position to start acting like that, to acting like a petulant child, acting like you can get away with things like that. I can understand Yang acting like this if she had a relationship with her mom, if she was living with her mom, and her mom was essentially, you know, the overbearing parent, and then she's like, shove, fuck off, mom, boom, destroyed some furniture. I can understand that. But she has no relationship with Raven. And Raven is a very fucking serious, very real, very dangerous human being to say the least, that she has almost no relationship with. That she has... So, it's not even that she has no relationship. She has no rapport with her, okay? They're not an established mommy-daughter fucking pair, okay? They don't interact. That changes everything. I'm sorry, but it does. Okay, if they have no rapport, they don't interact on a regular basis, there is no sense as to whether there should be any cooperation there. She has no reason to think that Raven would put up with that shit. Raven might be the kind of person to beat her half to death for doing shit like that. And I don't know why she doesn't. Because she has every reason to do that. I would do that if I was in Raven's position. Who the fuck are these kids coming into my camp, talking smack, asking me to do things? Like, you have to teach them respect, but Raven just takes all of it. Like, oh, you're my daughter, blah, blah, blah. Fuck. So then they go to Crow, and all that shit happens. Ugh. Jesus Christ. Oh, God. And then there's the scene where Yang, RWBY, and Weiss talk about Blake. And there's so many fucking scenes like this volume, where they just talk about the bad things that are happening or have happened rather than anything new happening. Again, they could have used this time to world build, to expand the setting, to add to the character, but no, they just reflect on what's already been going on. They party, they eat food, and they reflect on what's happening. That's what a lot of this volume has been. And I don't have a problem with that. That's not bad. It's just missed opportunities when you have so many other things, so many other relevant things present in the world that we should be getting more information about, like the world of Mistral, like the bandits, like Raven's backstory, so on and so forth. And then Yang starts bitching about Blake. Now, I understand why she'd want to bitch about Blake. I don't have a problem with her bitching. It makes sense. Blake ran away. Her mom ran away. She has a similar thing. It makes sense that she'd be upset. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. What I don't like is how she complained about it. She complained about it in the most amateur writing way possible. Like, it's like somebody thought, it's like, hey, what is the most cliche thing Yang could say right here? And then they just wrote that down. It's like, Yang says, why would I want her here? Don't tell me to calm down. Oh, no. Don't tell me to calm down. Jesus fucking Christ. Yang was just so abominable this volume. I felt, bleh. Don't tell me to calm down. This petulant child that just can't fucking here's the thing. They could have handled that with way more subtlety, is the point. They didn't need to be so obvious about it. Like, Yang is so obviously upset that Blake's there, and she's obviously getting angry, and then she says, well, don't tell me to calm down. You know, she could have just been quieter and calmer, and then just said some offhanded, backhanded remark about how, you know, if Blake's not there, it's like, well, who fucking cares? And then walked away. And then something like that would have been so much less cliche than what they ended up doing was her being, don't tell me to calm down. Yeah, no. You know, I'm on my period right now because I'm Yang and I'm mad. I'm sorry for that. Sometimes I tend to maybe I'm getting a little too brazen with my criticism to make a joke about Yang being on her period. But the point is, she was acting in a way that was not childish, but just fake. And they should have handled that with subtlety. Now, the way Weiss reacts to that, I actually like. And Weiss, the line she has about where she's like, you know, my life was like this, and, you know, you and I, we each have our own versions of effectively the same thing. And then Blake has her version, and I like that. That was a nice little line. It's essentially saying they all have the same problem, you know, little problems of growing up, and they each have their own separate versions of it. Although Blake's family is probably the most functional family out of all of them. So, Weiss's character is generally not terrible, but decent this entire This entire volume. Just the one time where she's like, "You're really obnoxious." What's the one line that was awful? Then you have Raven and Cinder getting together and then trying to out-bitch each other. And then the whole everyone is arrogant thing. Arthur is arrogant. Mercury is arrogant. Raven is arrogant. Vernal is arrogant. Cinder is arrogant. Every single fucking person there is so arrogant. Why? I would have much rather had Raven be the kind of character who, rather than trying to be arrogant and puff up her chest and stroke her ego, is instead calm, calculating, and just makes decisions and does things rather than try to talk about what a badass she is. It was that whole scene, like, when they're upon rewatching it, I just felt nauseated. It was just like, bleh. Like, they're all just so, it's such a cliche to have them all walk in there and talk like that. Oh my boy. Like, there needed to be some different kind of dynamic, is my point. Raven needed to be different. She didn't have to be arrogant. She could have just been the calm, calculating one who's taking this situation seriously, which she should be, rather than acting, rather than trying to talk down to Cinder and her group and try to convince them that, oh, look how tough I am. I'm Raven. I know everything about you guys. A disgraced Athlesian scientist, random vagabond, yada, yada, yada. Raven shouldn't be the type of character who does that kind of thing. Jesus Christ, I'm coughing now from all the yelling. So yeah, that was just annoying. And we're moving up to the end here. Then you have Cinder. And Cinder is also way too fucking brazen in this volume. Kind of like Yang. At the end there, oh god, and this pissed me off. It's a very similar thing to when Yang tried to fight those bandits. Cinder, Raven, and Vernal go down into the vault, and then Cinder, and again, they do the same thing with Cinder, where they're like, hey, look at what a badass Cinder is. She's so badass, right, guys? Yeah. You don't have to try so hard to show us what a badass she is, okay? She doesn't have to constantly act like a bitch to pull that off. And to just have Cinder to beat and dismantle both Vernal and disable Raven with that ice at the same time, as arrogantly as she did, without even looking. That is such ham-fisted combat that I was actually really pissed off there. I was really pissed off that Cinder was about to do this and get away with it. Now, on the one hand, I understand the choice, because this was a way for them to introduce the big twist. And the twist itself was good. The twist itself, well, I'll get to the twist later, but the twist itself was fine. However, the way Cinder pulled that off was disgusting. Again, same problem with as it was with Yang. Cinder she shouldn't have been able to do that. It's 2-on-1. One of them is a maiden. You're fucked. Like, plain and simple. 2, she shouldn't have thought that she could do that. She shouldn't have believed that she could possibly get away with that kind of thing. And she did. And in the most arrogant way. And she doesn't even look at them, but she's like, oh, Raven, I've heard such stories about you, that you're so cool. Shame, they're wrong. Poof, turn her into ice without looking. It's like, Jesus Christ, could you possibly shoehorn her being an OP bitch any more than that? She shouldn't have been able to do that. Raven herself is very fast and very smart, and she's a trained warrior who has a million more experience than this random young girl who just happens to have maiden powers. You should be able to crush her. Especially if you have another maiden with you, or at least you are the maiden. And then they fight, and the fight itself was pretty good. It doesn't really feel like a Monty fight anymore, but I mentioned that back in Volume 4. The Monty flair is gone, but the But, you know, the colors and the flash, it's all very good. And then Raven wins, of course. And if that fight ended in any other way, I would have just vomited. Because, Jesus Christ. Finally, somebody fucking, like... Finally, Cinder gets what she should have been getting for so long. Like, she had no reason to be that arrogant. She had no way. There's no way. She should have been able to get away with freezing Raven and then stabbing Vernal that way. That shouldn't have been possible. They should have gotten the jump on her. And then, you add to fucking explain it, Vernal had her aura down. And then the justification for this is that apparently you have to put your aura up before you're in a fight. Why did she have her aura down? She was in a fight just now, and her and Raven were planning on betraying Cinder. They weren't going to play ball. They weren't going to let Cinder have the relic. This was part of their plan, right? Why did she lower her guard? They were going down there ready to ambush her. Furthermore, why exactly did Cinder go down with just the two of them by themselves? Why didn't she bring backup? Did she really think she could take on Vernal and Raven herself, one of whom was a maiden? Like, even if Vernal wasn't looking and had her aura down, like, did Cinder honestly think that she could distract, freeze Raven, and then stab the other one so quickly that she could get the maiden power? Honestly? Really? She thought she could do that? If she thought she could do that, she's fucking stupid. Because that doesn't make sense. That shouldn't be possible inside, even in a world like this. It shouldn't be possible to just disable two incredibly trained, incredibly well-trained fighters who've been fighting for fucking years and years and years, who've seen, like, the shit, been out in the wild, and one of them's a maiden as well. It shouldn't be possible for you to get away with something like that, but she did anyway. Thank God they killed her off. Oh boy. And then Yang jumps down there with one arm. And I just have to look to myself, what the fuck is Yang thinking? Like, you think about it, the fact, Cinder, Raven, and Vernal are all down there. And they're not your allies. None of them are your allies. What are you gonna do with one arm? Are you gonna fight all three of them? Why the fuck did she go there by herself? What was the urgency? Was she gonna slip in there and steal the relic? Okay. Good luck with that. I mean, this is so stupid. And then she starts lecturing Raven about bravery. I want to remind you that Yang has done nothing but make mistakes this entire volume. She's been starting fights she didn't need to start. She's been rude to Raven and to people whose help that she needed, rather than standing up for, like, the idea is that she's been standing up for what's right in those scenes. No. And then at the end here, she starts, again, a stupid thing to jump down there in a fight that she couldn't possibly win. And then she starts lecturing Raven about bravery and fear. Holy fucking shit. Could the show get any more obnoxious than this? And again, this is all the result of the Rooster Teeth bubble. Now, I understand what they're going for with that scene. I do. It's the concept is perfectly solid. You want to have Raven and Yang have their little moment, and Yang shows Raven, hey, I'm actually the mature one and the brave one. You're actually the coward. And this is proven by the fact that Raven lets Yang have the relic and flies off. And funny thing is, right before she does that, they have the whole, like, shot of her looking down and the tear falling on the floor, which is, that's the second time this volume they did that. They did the exact same thing with Oscar back in, like, episode 6 or 7 or whatever. So, okay, that was the point, right? But it makes no sense in the context of what's happening. Yang is going down there without a plan, without any reason. Like, I mean, she has a reason to, but she doesn't have a plan. She doesn't have any way she could win. She lucked out that fucking Raven and Vernal took out Cinder. And that Raven herself is so sentimental that she was going to let Yang have the relic. Now, fortunately, like, things worked out perfectly well for Yang and the group there, right? They did not want Raven to have that relic. Even if, you know, taking the relic, this is where things really stop making sense, because why exactly would Raven even want the relic if she didn't have a plan as to what to do with it? Why would she want the relic at all if she didn't have anything in mind as to what she was just going to keep it? Just hold it, touch it, lick it? What the fuck was her plan? She didn't want any part of this, but she wasn't exactly going to get Salem have the relic. She understands that that's a problem. She doesn't want Salem to win. And this is another serious problem with the show, is that people don't seem to be taking the threat of Salem that seriously. The people who are helping Salem have very nonsensical reasons for doing so. They hate Ozpin for very petty reasons, meanwhile Salem is trying to destroy humanity. I'm sorry, but Salem trying to destroy humanity is worse than whatever petty revenge you could get from Ozpin, right? Even if you get what you want, there's still no place in the world for you if Salem wins. Why are you helping her? And if you're Raven, and if you're not helping Salem, and you're not helping Ozpin, you still need to consider the fact that Salem is still a threat, and you still need to take action against her, because she's still going to be a threat for you and your tribe. So if she was going to take the relic, she must have had a plan with it. And this is why I like the twist, is that the part of what the twist demonstrated was that Raven was actually a lot smarter than she seemed. She was actually very calculating. She acts like she doesn't want any part of the conflict, but what she's really doing is she's stacking the deck in her favor so that when the business comes to her, she knows how to get something out of it. That's how it came across. When Cinder and company come to her for the Maiden, she uses that as a situation to get a relic out of it for herself. I thought she wanted that with a plan. She didn't just have a Maiden and Maiden powers for no reason, right? If that, like, the thing, it's so stupid that Raven didn't consider that having the relic would make her more of a target before she decided to do all this, before she decided to go down there and be part of this plan. Or maybe it was just the fact that she couldn't let Salem have it. Right. Optimistically, we could interpret it that way. She knew she couldn't let Salem have the relic, and when Cinder was dead and Yang came down, she's like, well, I could let Yang have the relic. And then that's the good thing, because then everybody wins. And her whole thing about fear, even though it doesn't really make sense, like, even though everything she did made sense this volume, that sentimental point, you know, still I guess that point still holds. But I'm looking back at this volume, and I find it very, very hard not to take Raven's side on basically every single decision, right? Except for why the hell she doesn't demands more respect from people like Yang and Weiss, why she just takes all this abuse. That's the only thing I don't get. But Raven, in terms of her plan, she's completely right? Well, at least from her perspective, what she does makes perfect sense. She wouldn't tell Crow or any of those guys that she's betraying them, because if she does, that ruins her plan. She doesn't really want to help them get the relic. But at the same time, she doesn't want Cinder or them to get the relic either, so that she was planning on betraying them. That makes perfect sense. She wasn't actually ever on Cinder's team. That makes sense to me. It's just, this is, like, it's clunky. You get the sense that it's clunky when you have to ask yourself, what the hell was her real plan then? Was she going to take the relic for herself, or was she just trying to stop Cinder to let Crow and company get the relic, right? The thing is, she doesn't really want to help Crow because she doesn't really want to be part of the Ozpin team. Fine. Then she was going to take the relic for herself, but what was she going to do with it, other than prevent Salem from getting it? Because she has to prevent Salem from getting it. Salem can't be allowed to have a relic, right? Right? That would be very bad. And the justification for most of these choices seems to be something along the lines of, well, she's emotional, she's not thinking clearly. No, that's stupid, okay? Characters aren't fucking idiots just because they're emotional. You can't use that as to hand-wave every little thing. By the way, going back to that aura activation thing I mentioned, they mentioned that earlier in the volume, that you have to activate your aura. And I find that fucking fascinating, because that's completely new. I don't think that was not a thing in earlier volumes, but it's also a very convenient narrative tool. Because if you have to activate your aura, then the writers could just kill off whatever character they want, and then claim, well, you know, they didn't activate their aura. That's how they died. That's how they can just kill off characters very easily this way, and then claim that their auras were never activated, and then problem solved. I realize that a lot of these things are nitpicks, but seriously, these nitpicks would not bother me that much if there was, I don't know, more world building, like there was in Volume 4, if characters' decisions made some sense. But as it stands, a lot of these things are genuine flaws. And I understand, frankly, I understand the point of Raven's story here and her whole thing with Yang. I understand what they're going for. It's just so clunky is the problem. And part of the problem is the way Yang herself has been acting all volume, which is not as the mature, responsible, brave one, but as an idiot who doesn't understand where the fuck she is and what the fuck she's supposed to be doing. Raven has been acting actually quite intelligent, and to look at her decisions at the end of this and been saying, well, what the fuck's wrong with you? You're being the coward. That doesn't make much sense. You could criticize her for being selfish, certainly, but you can't criticize her for being stupid, and you can't criticize her for not thinking things through. Having Vernal be the decoy was a very smart fucking move. And it just annoys me that some people look at this and they're like, oh gosh, fucking Raven is so sad and damaged. Rather than giving her credit, which she deserves, for pulling all of this off. Because it does speak to her character, it speaks to her intelligence in a lot of ways for having Vernal be the decoy. A lot of this could have just been improved with better presentation and having a clear sense as to what these characters are trying to do. The problem with Rooster Teeth, and I'm going to get to this finally, the problem with Rooster Teeth's writing here is it's the effects of the Rooster Teeth bubble. And it's the same thing that happened in Volume 3. The Rooster Teeth bubble is essentially this thing where Miles and Carrie and the writers and the directors, they're all very, very, very preoccupied with the references and the memes and the little games and the jokes that they have going on at the Rooster Teeth office and with the Rooster Teeth community and the RTX community and all that. All these communities, they're so preoccupied with memeing amongst themselves than actually just telling the story in a solid, sensible way where it makes the most sense in a universal sense. Like, you put yourself outside of the Rooster Teeth meme bubble and the story just has all these flaws. It just does. I'm sorry. If you separate yourself from the bubble and just look at it as a work, it has all these flaws. So why don't they separate themselves from the bubble when they write? That's all they have to do. But no, they're too preoccupied with memeing and Yang talking about her. Yeah. I'm not too lean, not too skinny, just right. And this memeing, it gets its way. It tampers with the dialogue and it tampers with the story and it interferes with the character building, the world building, with every single thing that's supposed to move the story forward and develop it. And it ends up diverting our attention. This is exactly like the whole thing with the Pyrrha incident. Go back to that. People tell me why you didn't see this coming? Her name is Pyrrha. That's based on Pyrrhic victory and Achilles. Ha ha ha. But see, that's a fucking Rooster Teeth meme. That's not something that's in the story. That's not story development. That's a meme that somebody tweeted or something that was fucking Monty as an inspiration. It's not in the work. Okay? If you looked at Pyrrha as a character, just as a character based on her presentation within the work, it comes off very differently. And that character was neglected in favor of this meme character that you could only understand if you had insight into into the bubble and into the mind of these people and what they're actually preoccupied with. That's the general overarching problem with Rooster Teeth as a whole, is they're way, 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 way too preoccupied with just memeing rather than storytelling. That's essentially what I have to say. So overall, it's a bit of a disappointment, I guess, this volume. Although it had good ideas, and, you know, Volume 4 was still good. I still like Volume 4. If it just did more of that, more of the, like, integrating the world building with the character development, this would have been a lot better. And hopefully we get more of that next volume, but, yeah. I mean, it is what it is. The fights were cool, the twist was cool, the ideas themselves were perfectly fine. They were perfectly cool ideas. But they were presented in a clunky, at worst, a clunky amateur way, or in a way that was nonsensical, or they just forewent the obvious thing that you want to do, which is help add to the world, and to these characters and their stories, rather than just keep throwing this superficial fucking horseshit, like, memeing in our face and talking about how, oh, you know, she feels she's not a responsible mom, and she feels this, and rather than talking about their feelings, talk about their decisions. Rather than characters talking, they should be doing things. They should be making decisions that make sense in the context of their world. You need to show, not tell. That's the general, I guess, verdict here. Overall, I mean, it's not as good as Volume 4, I'd say. And I'm not even comparing it to the Monty arc, because that's a, you know, that's RWBY Chibi, non-canon. But yeah, that's how I feel. And I guess cheers. And hopefully Volume 6, when we get to know more about Atlas, there will be plenty of good things to talk about. Cheers.